Meanwhile, standing near the cross of Jesus were his mother and his mother's sister, Mary the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing beside her, he said to his mother, "Woman, here is your son." Then he said to the disciple, "Here is your mother." And from that hour the disciple took her into his own home.
Over the years, a number of people have sent me stories and jokes about bishops, including that old chestnut, which is still my all-time favourite. You'll know it, I'm sure. It's about a rather absent-minded bishop who heard a great preacher begin his sermon with the riveting words, "I well remember lying in the arms of another man's wife." Long pause. "My mother." Having seen how this grabbed everyone's attention, he thought he'd try it himself at a great big civic service that was being attended by a large number of county dignitaries. "I well remember," he began, "lying in the arms of another man's wife." The effect was everything he'd hoped for, an electrified silence. But the pause was rather longer than he'd intended and was broken only when he blurted out, "And for the life of me, I can't now remember who she was." Well, just recently we celebrated Mothering Sunday, a time when we do remember our mothers, whether they're alive or, as in my case, whether they've now died, and all that they have done for us. Abraham Lincoln once famously remarked, "All that I am or hope to be, I owe to my mother." And John Wesley, in similar vein, said, "I learnt more about Christianity from my mother than from all the theologians in England." Mothers provide the foundation on which character is built. Their patience has to be like toothpaste, always a little bit left, and they make the most of the best bricks for constructing the city of God. Of course, they're not always wonderful. I heard recently about a mother who was boasting about her grown-up son. "He's the most marvellous son in the world," she said. "He visits every Sunday, he phones twice a day. If he wants to take a girl out, he asks my opinion. And every Friday he goes to see a psychiatrist for a whole hour. And do you know what he talks about?" She beamed with pride. "He talks all about me." Mothers can also be rather embarrassing. I heard a lovely story about the actress Dame Judi Dench. When she began her career, her doting mother went to every performance until one day Judy's part in the theatre required her to come onto the stage and say, "Mother, where are you?" "Here I am, darling," came the reply, "Rogie." But one thing all mothers have in common is the pain of motherhood, not just at birth, but throughout their child's life. From sleepless nights, something we're now experiencing vicariously through our own children and grandchildren, to the anxiety when a teenager comes home late, to worry about a son's redundancy or a daughter's divorce. And Mary, the mother of Jesus, was no exception. Simeon prophesied that a sword would pierce her heart, and it did, many times over, from those early days of the flight into Egypt right through to her son's execution at or around the age of just 33. Nina, a little girl playing the angel Gabriel in her school nativity play, summed it up when she blithely and poignantly announced, "Don't worry, Mary, you'll have a lovely baby and call him Jesus. But I wouldn't get too attached to him, 'cause he'll be dead by Easter." Mary was there at the beginning when Jesus was born in a stable. And she was there at the end when he died on a cross. And in between, there was much confusion and great hurt. But there were good times too, especially those childhood years when she taught Jesus to pray and worship and made him learn that psalm, Psalm 22, which he quoted with his dying breath. She helped to mould his spirit, and Luke's words about Jesus growing big and strong and full of wisdom speak of her love and influence. Jesus' relationship with his mother was very important to him, and what he said to her from the cross was highly significant because it shows how that relationship acquired a whole new meaning and even greater depth through his death. First, he spoke about God and Mary's relationship with the Father. "Dear woman," he said. Now, at this very point, Jesus was in the middle of his cosmic struggle against the powers of evil and darkness. But all his thoughts so far had been for other people, for the executioners, Father, forgive them, for the penitent thief, today you'll be with me in paradise. And his remark to Mary was a confirmation of her infinite worth and value as an individual, not just to him, but to God, his Father, as well. And just the same applies to all of us. Even though God alone sees the big picture and has sovereignty over the whole world, each of us matters to him as an individual. And as we too stand at the foot of the cross this Holy Week, there is no distinction between us. We are all forgiven sinners. A bishop is no more or less important in God's sight than the vagrant who rings on his doorbell, as one did just a day or two ago on ours, asking for a cup of tea. When my wife Alison and I were working in India as missionaries, we came across the writings of Amy Carmichael, which are much revered there. And a verse from one of her poems expresses very well this concern that God has for every one of us. Lord of night's jewelled roof, day's various tapestry, Lord of the warp and woof, of all that yet shall be, 'tis wonderful to me that I am loved by thee. Same sentiment as is expressed in one of my very favourite hymns, "It is a thing most wonderful." And this is something that we all need to remember and hold on to during these difficult pandemic times. Our infinite worth and value, each one of us, in the sight of God. So Jesus spoke about God to his mother, and then he spoke about his friend John and Mary's relationship with him. "Here is your son," he said. And to John, "Here is your mother." Well, John was probably Mary's nephew. His mother, Salome, was Mary's sister and one of the 3 other women with Mary by the cross. So a close relationship already existed between Mary and John, but Jesus caused them both to look at each other in a new way, causing the relationship to become even closer. No longer aunt and nephew, but mother and son. In a sense, this was Jesus' last will and testament, his way of putting his affairs in order. He had no home or money or even clothes to dispose of. He went from the world as he came into it with nothing except his mother. And he entrusted her now to the care of his closest friend. And the crucified Christ has the same effect on our relationships with each other, because the bond that his Spirit creates between us as Christians is closer than even the ties of blood. One of the remarks Jesus made during his life, which must most have bewildered Mary, was, "Who is my mother? Who are my brothers? Those who obey my commandments are my mother and brothers. We are his family." All of us who know him and love him and try to follow him. And he opens our eyes to see each other in a whole new way as the brothers and sisters we are. That's what we call fellowship. And it's for those bonds and ties, that new depth of relationship, that we need to pray in the weeks and months ahead as we begin to emerge from this pandemic, not least this week as we stand at the foot of the cross and share its pain. Jesus spoke about God, he spoke about John, and third, he spoke about the church, not directly, but by implication in those words to his mother. From the early church fathers onwards, almost all commentators on this passage have seen Mary as representing Mother Church. Just as John, the beloved disciple, has a responsibility towards her, so she will nurture this new offspring of hers, modelled after Jesus. And this is all part of God's plan, as we read in the very next verse. After this, knowing that all was now completed. And again, there are some direct implications for us and our relationship, not just with each other, but with the church of which we're a part. As Christians, we have a responsibility to honour and care for God's church. And the church is there as our new family to sustain and nourish us. In the parish where I was vicar for 12 years, one of our most committed and faithful church members had a severely autistic child. As you probably know, autistic children often live in a world of their own, refusing contact with others and even eye contact, in this case, with their mother. One of the most successful treatments yet developed is called the holding treatment. And this mother used to hold her son lovingly but firmly, trying to look him in the eye. He would resist, wriggling and squirming, and this often went on for ages, but when at last he gave in, as he did from time to time, there was a great sense of peace and an embrace of love rather than a battle of wills. And that contributed to the slow development of a whole new relationship between him and the world around him. It's the same with us and the church. Most of the time, we're not sure we really even want to engage or to be sucked in. Responsible discipleship is too alarming and costly. And there's so much about and in church that we find difficult and even alienating. But this passage, this story, this word of Jesus from the cross is an encouragement to us to persevere, come what may, knowing that this is where we belong and where in the long term growth in discipleship, often through difficulties and even through suffering, is to be found. From the cross, Jesus said to his mother, "Dear woman, here is your son." And to the disciple whom he loved, "Here is your mother." In those simple words, he spoke to Mary about God, about John, and about his church. And he speaks to us about the recreative act by which he clothes us with a whole new set of relationships and makes new creatures of us all. Amen.